I didn't notice it all at once. If I'm honest, I think part of me noticed early and decided not to understand what I was seeing. Because some realizations don't arrive as thoughts. They arrive as small discomforts you explain away before they fully form. And at the time, everything between us still looked fine. We were still together, still texting during the day, still making plans for weekends that actually happened. If someone had asked me then how things were going, I would have said good. Maybe even really good. And I wouldn't have been lying. That's what makes it confusing now. Nothing felt broken. I just slowly began noticing that she seemed lighter when I wasn't there. We met through mutual friends. One of those situations where everyone already knew each other except us, which somehow makes conversation easier. There's less pressure. You're both slightly outside the circle. She was sitting at the edge of the couch when I arrived, listening more than talking. I remember noticing how comfortable she looked doing nothing. Some people try to occupy space immediately, fill silence, perform interest. She didn't. She laughed quietly at things, sometimes a few seconds after everyone else, like she processed moments fully before reacting. Later that night, we ended up talking in the kitchen while everyone argued about where to go next. I don't remember what we talked about exactly. Just that conversation didn't feel effortful. I didn't feel evaluated. And afterward, walking home, I remember thinking something simple. I could relax around her. At the time, that felt important. The beginning unfolded naturally. No big declaration. We just kept choosing each other again. Coffee after work turned into dinners. Dinners turned into staying over. Eventually, my toothbrush appeared in her bathroom without discussion. She told me everything back then. Small frustrations, random thoughts, things she noticed during the day that didn't really matter. Sometimes she'd call just to complain about traffic or describe someone strange she'd seen at a store. I like that. Being included before experiences became stories. Before they were filtered, I didn't realize how much intimacy lives inside unfinished thoughts. You feel trusted when someone lets you hear their mind in motion. And for a long time, I was where her thoughts landed first. When we moved in together, life became calm quickly, predictable in comforting ways. Groceries on Sundays. Dinner while watching shows neither of us fully followed. Falling asleep at almost the same time every night. I remember feeling proud of how stable everything was. No drama. No emotional swings. No fear of losing her suddenly. I thought stability meant success. I thought love eventually becomes quiet. Maybe it does. But quiet can slowly become something else if you stop noticing it. The first change was almost invisible. She started going out more without me. Not intentionally excluding me. Just separate plans. Work dinners. Friends I didn't know well. At first I liked it. Independence felt healthy. We trusted each other completely. She'd come home smiling, energized, talking quickly about conversations and jokes and things that happened. And I remember thinking how happy she looked. That should have felt reassuring. Instead, something small unsettled me. Because that energy didn't appear the same way when we spent evenings together. I ignored that thought for weeks. Maybe months. People are allowed to feel different in different environments. That's normal. But then I started noticing patterns. She laughed more freely with friends. Talked longer on calls after leaving the room. Seemed more animated describing experiences that didn't include me. And when it was just us, things were calm. Comfortable. But softer. Quieter. Almost careful. One night stands out. We were at a small gathering together. Nothing unusual. People talking, music low in the background. At some point I stepped outside to take a call. When I came back in, I saw her across the room laughing. Not politely. Fully. Head tilted back. Unfiltered happiness. She didn't notice me immediately. And for a moment, I just watched. Because something felt unfamiliar. It wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. I realized I hadn't seen her laugh like that with me in a long time. The thought passed quickly. I told myself I was imagining things. But once you notice something like that, your brain keeps returning to it. After that, small moments accumulated. She seemed more relaxed when making plans alone. Less hesitant. More spontaneous. Meanwhile, our time together felt increasingly structured. Dinner. Show. Sleep. Conversation became updates instead of exploration. How was work? Good. Busy. Yeah. Nothing wrong. Just finished. We already knew each other. Or thought we did. And curiosity quietly disappeared. The realization came unexpectedly. A Saturday afternoon. She went away for the weekend with friends. I stayed home. The apartment felt normal without her. Peaceful. I assumed she'd miss me the same way I occasionally missed her presence. But when she came back Sunday night, she walked in glowing, talking fast, excited, recharged. She hugged me warmly. But there was something else underneath. Relief. Not relief to see me. Relief that lingered from being away. And that's when the thought finally formed clearly. She seemed happier when I wasn't around. I hated myself for thinking it. But once it existed, everything rearranged around it. I started paying attention differently. Not searching for proof. Just noticing. How conversations with me ended sooner. How silence settled more easily between us. How she lingered longer when saying goodbye to friends than when coming home. None of it meant she didn't love me. That's what made it confusing. She was still kind. Still affectionate. Still present. But emotional energy moved elsewhere first. I didn't confront her. What would I even say? You seem happier without me, sounds accusatory. Unfair. So instead, I adjusted. Became easier. Less demanding. Gave more space. Which only accelerated the distance. Because when you sense someone pulling away, you instinctively try not to become heavy. You shrink slightly, without realizing it. One evening, months later, we were sitting together on the couch. Both on our phones. Comfortable silence. And suddenly I realized something worse. I felt more relaxed when she focused elsewhere too. No pressure to entertain. No need to connect deeply. We had both adapted to reduced presence. We weren't hurting each other. We were simply no longer energizing each other. That realization felt strangely calm. And deeply sad at the same time. The conversation that followed weeks later was gentle. No accusations. She said she felt disconnected lately. I nodded immediately. Relief again. Neither of us cried at first. We just acknowledged something already true. There was nothing dramatic to fix. No betrayal. No resentment. Just two people recognizing that love had quietly stopped making them feel more alive. After she moved out, I expected devastation. Instead, life rearranged itself smoothly. That frightened me, because it confirmed what I'd already suspected. We had been preparing emotionally long before leaving. Months later, I saw photos of her online. Traveling, laughing, looking open in ways I remembered from early on. And surprisingly, I didn't feel replaced. I felt clarity. She wasn't happier because I was bad for her. She was happier because we had both outgrown the version of ourselves we became together. That took time to accept. For a while I wondered if I had diminished her somehow. If my presence had made life smaller. But eventually another understanding replaced that fear. Sometimes two people simply stop expanding together. And when growth resumes separately, happiness returns naturally. I don't resent her now. If anything, I'm grateful. Because noticing that shift forced me to confront something uncomfortable about myself too. I had become comfortable, predictable, less curious. I stopped showing up fully long before I noticed her doing the same. We didn't fail each other. We just stopped bringing new energy into something that required renewal. These days, I notice happiness differently. When someone lights up during conversation. When laughter arrives easily. When curiosity flows both directions. I pay attention to whether presence feels energizing instead of merely peaceful. Because peace without aliveness can quietly become distance. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that moment across the room. Watching her laugh before she noticed me. I used to interpret it as loss. Now it feels more honest than painful. She wasn't happier without me. She was happier being fully herself again. And eventually, so was I. I think that's what took the longest to understand. Love doesn't always end because someone is wrong. Sometimes it ends because happiness starts living in different places. And noticing that doesn't break you. It just changes how you understand connection. I was there. She was there too. We just stopped being where each other felt most alive. And once you see that, you can't really pretend not to anymore. So eventually, quietly, we let each other go. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just enough to allow happiness to return. Even if it meant it returned somewhere else. And I still don't know exactly when that shift began. Only that one day I noticed it. And after that, everything made sense in a way I wish it hadn't. But maybe understanding always arrives a little late. Right when there's nothing left to change. I think what stayed with me afterward wasn't the breakup itself. It was the question that followed. Not why did we end, but when did she start feeling freer without me there? That thought didn't arrive as insecurity. It arrived as curiosity. Because when someone leaves angrily, you understand the distance. When someone is hurt, the separation feels logical. But when things end gently, your mind keeps searching for movement you missed while it was happening. and I kept returning to ordinary memories. The middle ones. Not the beginning. Not the ending. The long stretch where nothing seemed wrong. I started remembering how she used to look at me when we first lived together. Not constantly. Just small glances. Checking whether I'd heard something funny. Waiting for my reaction before finishing a story. There's a kind of invisible coordination that happens when two people are emotionally aligned. You look for each other without deciding to. You measure moments together. Somewhere along the way, we stopped doing that. I don't know who changed first. Maybe neither of us did. Maybe comfort slowly replaced attention. And attention is quieter when it disappears than people expect. After she moved out, I noticed something strange about my evenings. They felt open. At first I interpreted that as loneliness. But it wasn't exactly that. It was the absence of emotional negotiation. No subtle monitoring of mood. No wondering whether silence meant tiredness or distance. No adjusting energy to match someone else's state. I hadn't realized how much unconscious effort existed near the end. We were both protecting peace instead of participating in connection. And peace, when protected too carefully, becomes fragile. There was one night a few months later when it really settled in. I was out with friends. Nothing special. Just dinner that turned into longer conversation than expected. At some point I laughed, fully, without restraint. And immediately afterward, I noticed something. I wasn't thinking about telling anyone later. The moment felt complete on its own. That startled me. Because for years, experiences felt unfinished until shared with her. Now they ended naturally. And instead of sadness, I felt something quieter. Return. Like part of myself had slowly come back online. For a while, I worried that realization meant our relationship had been limiting somehow. That maybe I had held her back. Or she had held me back. But the more distance passed, the less that interpretation made sense. We hadn't restricted each other. We had simply stopped evolving together. Two lives moving at slightly different emotional speeds. No conflict required. Just gradual misalignment. I ran into her again about 8 months later. Completely accidental. A bookstore downtown. We both reached for the same shelf and laughed at the coincidence. The conversation felt easy. Familiar. Warm. But something fundamental had changed. There was no pull underneath it. No sense of unfinished emotion waiting to reconnect. She seemed relaxed. Present. And I realized I felt the same. We talked for a few minutes about work, mutual friends, ordinary updates. Then she said something simple before leaving. "I'm really glad you're doing well." And I believed she meant it. Not politely. Honestly. Walking away afterward, I noticed I didn't replay the conversation. Didn't analyze tone or meaning. It existed exactly as it was. Complete. That's when I understood something I couldn't see before. She hadn't become happier without me. She had become happier once neither of us was trying to maintain something that no longer moved naturally. And the same was true for me. We weren't wrong for each other. We were just finished growing in the same direction. I think people misunderstand endings like ours. They assume someone must have checked out first. That one person loved less. But sometimes both people stay long past emotional alignment because kindness makes leaving difficult. We cared enough to avoid hurting each other, but not enough to keep rediscovering each other. And rediscovery is what keeps love alive. Without it, affection remains, but aliveness fades. Now, when I think about relationships, I notice energy more than compatibility. Does conversation expand? Do silences feel shared instead of separate? Do you feel more yourself, or slightly smaller? Those questions matter more than stability ever did. Because stability can exist even when connection quietly disappears. I learned that slowly. Too slowly to save us. But early enough to recognize it next time. Sometimes late at night, I still remember how subtle the change was. No betrayal. No dramatic mistake. Just two people gradually becoming less essential to each other's happiness. And maybe that's the hardest truth. Love doesn't always end because someone leaves. Sometimes it ends because both people learn how to be okay apart, while still together. And once that happens, separation becomes inevitable. Not painful, just honest. I don't feel replaced when I think about her now. I don't feel rejected. What I feel is understanding. We were important to each other once. Deeply. And then life kept moving, and importance shifted the way it naturally does when attention moves elsewhere. That doesn't erase what existed. It just changes where it lives. These days, when someone laughs freely around me, or tells me something small without thinking twice, I notice it, because I understand now how fragile that instinct is. how easily people stop sharing when connection stops feeling alive. And I try to show up differently. Not perfectly, just consciously, present, curious, willing to interrupt silence again. I didn't notice when she became happier without me around, but I noticed when I stopped needing to measure myself against that idea. And strangely, that's when peace finally felt real. Not the careful peace we had near the end. A quieter one. The kind that comes when you stop trying to understand who is at fault and accept that sometimes two people simply stop being where each other feels most alive. And that doesn't mean the love wasn't real, only that it belonged to a different time. A version of us that existed fully, until it didn't anymore. And eventually, memory stops asking questions. It just sits beside you, quietly, like something understood too late, but understood enough. I think after that, I stopped trying to compare versions of us. For a long time, I kept measuring everything against the beginning. Who we were when conversation felt effortless, when silence meant comfort instead of distance, when being together felt like participation instead of maintenance. But memory isn't fair like that. It preserves intensity better than reality ever could. And slowly, I understood that the beginning wasn't more real than the ending. It was just earlier. There's something strange about realizing a relationship didn't collapse. It simply completed itself. No one failed. No one betrayed anyone. We just reached a point where continuing required more emotional effort than either of us naturally had left. And neither of us knew how to say that without sounding cruel. So we stayed gentle, careful, patient, almost overly respectful of each other's space. Looking back, I think that was the clearest sign something had changed. We stopped inconveniencing each other emotionally, stopped interrupting, stopped asking questions that might lead somewhere uncomfortable. We protected peace so successfully that nothing alive could survive inside it. I remember noticing how predictable we became near the end. Not boring, just known. I could anticipate her reactions before she spoke. She probably could do the same with me. At first that felt like intimacy. Later it felt like completion. There was nothing left to discover. And discovery, I've realized, is quieter than passion, but just as necessary. Without discovery, people slowly move from curiosity to familiarity to background. After the breakup, I went through a phase where I paid attention to couples everywhere. Not intentionally, just automatically. At restaurants, on public transport, walking through parks. I noticed how often people leaned toward each other while talking, how quickly they shared things, how naturally they interrupted. Those interruptions stood out to me now, because interruption means urgency. It means you matter enough to know this immediately. I realized we had stopped feeling urgent to each other long before we separated. Nothing needed to be shared right away anymore. Everything could wait. And eventually, everything did. One evening about a year later, something happened that felt small but important. I was cooking dinner alone, music playing quietly, and I caught myself talking out loud about my day, just thinking through something. At first I laughed at myself, but then I noticed something deeper. I wasn't imagining telling her. I wasn't imagining telling anyone. I was simply present inside my own experience again. That felt unfamiliar in a peaceful way. For years, part of my identity had existed relationally, shaped by being witnessed. Now experience belonged fully to me again. Not better, just different. I don't think we realized how much of ourselves we had gradually minimized to keep things smooth. You adjust slowly in relationships. You speak less about topics that don't land. You avoid questions that lead nowhere. You match energy. And over time, adjustment becomes personality. Near the end, I think we were both quieter versions of ourselves. Not unhappy, just reduced. And neither of us noticed until distance made contrast visible. Sometimes people ask whether I'd go back if I could. It's a strange question, because there isn't a single moment to return to. You can't go back to curiosity once it fades naturally. You can't recreate discovery with someone you already stopped wondering about. What we had was real. It just belonged to a specific time in our lives. And time moved. We moved with it. Just not together anymore. I don't think she was happier because I was gone. And I wasn't happier because she left. We were happier because neither of us was quietly carrying the weight of something unfinished anymore. There's relief in honesty, even unspoken honesty. Relief in no longer pretending closeness still exists when both people feel it thinning. And that relief doesn't erase love. It just changes its form. Now, when someone enters my life, I notice something different. I pay attention to energy. Do conversations feel unfinished in a good way? Do we keep returning to each other's thoughts? Do small things arrive naturally again? Because I understand now that relationships don't survive on compatibility alone. They survive on continued curiosity, on choosing to keep discovering someone even after familiarity settles in. That choice has to keep happening, quietly, daily, without announcement. Sometimes late at night, I still think about how ordinary our ending was, how nothing demanded urgency, how life simply adjusted around absence until separation felt logical. And maybe that's why it doesn't hurt the way people expect heartbreak to hurt. There's sadness, yes, but mostly recognition. We didn't lose each other suddenly. We just stopped being where each other felt most alive. I used to fear becoming unimportant in someone's life. That idea terrified me. Now it feels human. Importance isn't permanent. It moves, changes shape, requires renewal. And when renewal stops, fading isn't failure. It's momentum, life continuing forward. Every once in a while, something still reminds me of her. A song, a street, a random memory arriving without warning. But the feeling attached to it is gentle now, like remembering a place you once lived. Important, formative, but no longer home. I didn't notice when she became happier without me around. And maybe she didn't notice when I did too. Because happiness wasn't waiting on the other side of separation. It arrived slowly, once neither of us was trying to hold on to something already ending. And that understanding feels quieter than closure, more honest than resolution. Just acceptance settling where questions used to live. These days, when someone tells me something small, a thought that doesn't matter, a story that goes nowhere, a feeling still unfinished, I listen carefully, because I know what it means to be trusted with someone's ordinary moments. I know how easily those moments stop coming, and how quietly everything changes once they do. We didn't end because love disappeared. We ended because presence did, because attention drifted, because showing up stopped happening naturally. And by the time either of us understood, life had already begun moving forward without needing us to hold it together anymore. I was still there. So was she. But being there isn't the same as being needed, or chosen, or thought of first. And when that changes, nothing breaks. Everything simply continues. Until one day, you realize the story has already finished. And you're just remembering it now. Quietly, without urgency, without blame, just understanding, finally catching up.